September 14th, 1871. Canyon de Chelly, in the dry hush between the red cliffs and the braided wash, at a trading post that smelled of wet wool, tobacco, and horse sweat. A wind pushed fine dust across the wooden planks of the landing. It told stories of long afternoons and sudden storms. Elias Harlan, trader, ledger-keeper, a man with grease-streaked cuffs and a remembered accent from Boston, stood beneath the slatted awning, squinting at a bundle being unrolled on a blanket of sun. Beside him, two soldiers in tarnished blue, Sergeant Thomas Mallory and Corporal James Reed, leaned on their sabers, bored guards of the frontier who had been sent to keep the peace and to keep curious Southerners from claiming trade routes. Mallory spat, then rubbed at his chin. The metal of his badge had a smear of desert grit. Across from them, a woman moved with a calm that made the men feel like intruders. She was named Naazh-iiʼ, though most in the trading circle called her Na. Her hair was braided and wound with strips of dyed wool. Her hands, callused, precise, unrolled a blanket the color of thunderclouds and corn silk. The wool gave a faint, fermented tang, lanolin and smoke. Na shifted the piece under the light, and the pattern snapped into view. Tight diamonds nested inside diamonds, each edge crisp as an insect's wing. The twill lines ran so fine that the eye had to work to follow them. The weave was compact, dense, almost glass-like. Elias had seen plenty of Indian blankets in his time. Coarse trade cloth, bright but crude stripes, patterns that shouted their origin the moment they were hoisted. He knew how to appraise pelts and silver, how to haggle and make numbers tell a lie that still favored him. He expected roughness. Instead, the blanket lay there as if pressed into being by another intelligence. Geometry folded onto geometry, the fabric itself a stubborn, exacting instrument of order. Elias frowned. He moved closer, coin pouch heavy at his belt, and ran the pad of his thumb just above the edge. The wool did not bloom under pressure. It resisted. The weave did not flex the way he'd learned to expect. "Primitive," muttered Mallory, half to himself. The word a coin he thought would buy contempt. He'd heard traders call the work primitive before, an easy dismissal that justified low offers and quick deals. But this time the dismissal stuck in his throat. Corporal Reed, who liked simple answers, said out loud what the pair had been thinking. "Looks like a city weaver's work to me. Somebody taught 'em well." Na didn't look up. Her face held a reserve of continuing labor. A decade of small economies lived in the set of her shoulders. Around her, other women, relatives and apprentices, sat on low stools, fingers steady in the rhythm of the loom behind the trading shack. Loom posts cast long carved shadows across the courtyard. The looms themselves were simple, upright frames of sawed timber, pegs worked smooth by hands. Yet the way the reed rattled and the shuttle flew betrayed a choreography learned over long nights by hearth light, by the press of weather and famine and barter. The soldiers noticed the tools at first as mere accoutrements. It was what the tools produced that unmoored their assumptions. Elias did the sort of thing traders do when they need to anchor their suspicion. He inspected the selvage with the care of a man checking the seam of a saddle. The stitching along the edge was tight, too tight, and the diamonds held their angles like iron. He tapped the weave with a coin, listening for a tone the cloth did not give. The blanket, in sound and feel, argued against his categories. "You've where it came from?" he asked. the professional curiosity bleeding into something more like wonder. Na's voice was low, neither pleading nor defensive. She said, "From the loom, from the wool, from the patterns our grandmothers gave us." The trading post conversations had methods. The trader praised faintly, asked questions sharply, then offered a price meant to feel generous. Elias started in that old motion, an appraisal that would fold into a ledger, but found his numbers absent, wobbling. Across the yard, other blankets were spread, plainer pieces, some dyed in the red of cochineal, some with broad stripes where the market demanded the obvious. Those could be priced. These diamonds were trouble. One of the apprentices, an adolescent named To'eyin, who had the quick hands of a future master, pressed a second, smaller blanket forward, almost shy. Under the heat, the dye took on a depth like river stone. The twill there was finer still, a fine lattice so exact the eye could scarcely believe thread could be coaxed into such restraint. Elias felt the trader's instinct flip. This was not simple labor, this was craftsmanship. And craftsmanship, if sold right, could be measured into profit, if only someone could match it. Mallory snorted. Anyone in Boston could have taught him that, probably. Some Yankee came through, gave a lesson, left. That's how these things spread. He spat again. The assumption was a defense. To call something taught by outsiders was to own the explanation, to keep the center of skill in the cities and mines and universities. But among the Navajo gathered there was a lightness in their faces that this insult failed to touch. They had lived with the loom long enough to know where their labor sat in time. Na's grandmother had taught her fine twills, and her grandmother before that. This was not imitation, but inheritance. Still, traders like Elias wanted a narrative that fit their world. If it looked sophisticated, it must be the product of someone from civilization. That mindset favored control, and control favored profit. As twilight cooled the courtyard, oil lamps were lit. The blankets, laid out like maps, absorbed the low light. Elias counted his coins and his assumptions and found a worrying gap between them. He had come to trade expectation for a profit. Instead, he found mastery that refused to be priced quickly. Night settled. Outside, the canyon walls kept the world's noises to themselves. Inside the trading post, men and women measured each other by different metrics, one by market value, the other by lineage and skill. The unseen scales teetered.
Elias didn't sleep that night. The wind that dragged down from the canyon walls rasped against the shutters like dry corn husks turned by hand. He lay on his cot behind the counter of the trading post, staring at the rafters, eyebrows knotted. A single lantern guttered beside his ledger, open to a blank page where numbers should have been. He priced horses and rifles, silver and corn, but what was the rate of labor passed down through 5 generations of unbroken refinement? He pushed himself upright, boots thudding to the floor. On the counter lay one of the smaller diamond twill samples he had purchased before dusk, at a price he already suspected was insultingly low. He pulled it toward him, gripping it in both hands as though it might confess. "Handed down," he muttered, echoing Na's words. "Patterns their grandmothers gave them." He brought a magnifying lens to the wool, following the diagonal ridges of the twill. Each line was consistent in pressure and tension. There were no slippages, no visible joins. It was as though the threads had agreed to behave. He flipped it over. No loose ends. He'd seen European looms leave the faintest inconsistencies. Factories in Manchester, Industrial powerhouses of stripe and spool couldn't keep this kind of discipline without machines larger than carriages. And yet this blanket had been made on a wooden frame no more complex than the ladders that leaned across his wall. A sound behind him, boots on dirt. Sergeant Mallory shuffled in, rubbing sleep from his eyes, still in uniform trousers and undershirt. "You up already?" Mallory grunted. "The sun's not even scratched the rim yet." Elias held the blanket up like an accusation. "Look at this." Mallory yawned wide. "It's a blanket." "No," Elias said, voice low. "It's a puzzle. A puzzle I intend to solve." Mallory squinted. "You're not telling me you've caught admiration for Indian woolcraft." "I'm telling you," Elias replied, "that if this can be reproduced, it can be sold. And if it can be sold in Boston or New York or hell, London, it could fetch 20 times what I paid today." Mallory grunted, now interested. "So, buy more and sell 'em east?" Elias's fingers tightened. "Or learn to make them, manufacture, control the source." Mallory smirked. "Teach city women to do a savage's trick?" Elias ignored the slur. He'd already fetched needle and thread, mock-weaving crude diagonal passes over a scrap of wool. He checked it. Compared to the Navajo sample, his attempt was loose as a fisherman's net. Mallory's grin widened. "You're serious?" "I'm going to bring in weavers, spinners from Santa Fe, cloth men from the fort. We'll take one of these apart, study how it's made. If they learned it, we can too." Mallory snorted. "Good luck. Indians'll tell you spirits whisper it to 'em while they sleep." "Then I'll buy the spirits a drink and ask politely," Elias said, flatly. By mid-morning, the yard behind the trading post looked like an impromptu factory. A Manchester-made loom, half-rusted from transport, was dragged out from storage. Thick industrial spindles were mounted. A town seamstress named Edith Green, thin, hard-faced, and unimpressed by most of frontier life, arrived stiffly on horseback at Elias's request. She stepped down, removed her gloves, and examined the Navajo blanket with her lips pressed into a firm line. Machine would need weeks of tuning to get thread this tight, and this wasn't done by machine. "Could you do it?" Elias asked. She held the edge. "Not in this lifetime. You're the best weaver within 100 miles. She looked at him with something like annoyance. "Then this wasn't made within 100 miles of where you expect skill to come from." Mallory and Reed leaned against a fence post, amused spectators. Edith took a seat at the European loom anyway. She worked for an hour, replicating a diagonal twill. The result sagged imperfectly. When she lifted her sample to compare, the difference made her face tighten. "This is not the same system," she said slowly. "Same pattern," Elias pressed. "Not same rhythm. This blanket wasn't built row by row. It was built in passes, continuous tension. They don't break thread unless they must. Their fingers must be trained from childhood." Elias opened his mouth to argue, to insist, to propose a solution, but found no words. Mallory crossed his arms smugly. "Told you, spirit whisper." Edith glanced sharply at him. "Spirit or none, someone taught them discipline you don't get from factories. You don't get it from profit. You get it from surviving winters." Elias stood silent, jaw tight. For the first time since opening that trading post, he felt shut out. Not because he lacked tools, because he lacked lineage.
While Elias wrestled with failed attempts and fraying pride, life in the Navajo encampment continued with the silence of absolute confidence. Morning light spilled over the canyon like molten copper. Smoke from cooking fires spiraled thin ribbons into the chill air. The looms stood upright among the hogans, as naturally as trees in a grove, each one lashed with hand-smoothed poles, rawhide tension braces, and beams worn glossy where hands had rested thousands of times. Naazh-iiʼ sat before her loom, like a commander before a map. A blanket was already in progress, the pattern rising slowly from the bottom beam like a landscape of her own design. The diamonds she plotted into existence were not sketched on parchment, but remembered. Thread by thread, she wrested order from memory the way others might recite prayer. Her youngest apprentice, Naazh-iiʼ, sat cross-legged to her right, winding hand-carded wool into continuous weft. She had been doing it since sunrise, and she would likely continue until her legs went numb. There was discipline here, a rigor that looked like stillness from a distance, but burned like endurance when examined closely. "You watch the corners," Naazh murmured, without looking away from her work. "If the corners bend, the whole world leans." Naazh-iiʼ nodded, though she didn't fully understand yet. She had learned how to card, how to spin, how to wash lanolin from fleece without stripping its strength. She had learned how to feel tension with her palm rather than her eyes. Soon she would be trusted with her own loom. Soon she would choose her own pattern. Behind them, an elder named Ashki sat beside another loom, humming low as he worked a wide striped blanket. Though most traders believed weaving was women's work, among the Navajo it was not bound so tightly. Skill was skill. Whoever could command it earned respect. Further up the path, 2 sheep bleated softly in their pen. Their wool would be sheared when the seasons turned. Their coats were fine, soft, descendants of the churro flocks brought centuries ago by Spanish colonists, then improved and protected by Navajo hands. Every thread in the blanket trailing from Naazh's loom had once been grass eaten on canyon hillsides. The entire supply chain was within walking distance. Weaving here was not a craft, nor a trade, nor even merely art. It was continuity. The canyon walls surrounding them had watched generations sit at these looms. Children had fallen asleep to the clack of batten against beam. Stories were told along the warp lines. Blessings were woven between dye and fiber. The loom was not an instrument. It was an ancestor. Meanwhile, Elias and Edith stood just outside the encampment, watching. They had followed Naazh back after she collected more blankets, but now stood at a respectful distance, unsure if they were trespassing. Edith whispered without taking her eyes off the loom. "She isn't looking at the pattern." Elias watched Naazh's hands move. Shuttle passing through the warp, fingers adjusting strand thickness by instinct. She didn't measure. She didn't pause to recalculate. Her movements were as natural as breathing. "That's not copying. That's remembering," Edith continued. Elias swallowed. A childhood memory stirred. His grandmother knitting in a rocking chair back in Massachusetts. She would whisper to herself as she looped thread. Not words, but a rhythm. He had never understood then. He understood now. Some knowledge could not be bought, only earned or inherited. Naazh suddenly spoke without turning. "You watch like crows." Elias stiffened, but her tone was not angry, merely factual. "Do you want to trade or only stare?" Edith stepped forward slowly. "We wanted to understand." Naazh paused her weaving, turned, her face unreadable. "Understanding does not come from watching." She pointed to Naazh's stool. "Sit." Edith blinked. "Me?" "Sit," Naazh repeated. Elias looked at her, half thrilled, half terrified. Edith sat. Naazh handed her the spindle. The wool was softer than Edith expected, warm, alive somehow. Spin, Naazh said. I don't. Spin. Edith tried. Her first attempt broke the wool. Naazh waited. No correction, no comfort, only expectation. Edith tried again. This time, the thread held. Her shoulders loosened, her breath slowed. And for the first time since arriving in this canyon, the distance between observer and craftsman narrowed.
Word traveled fast. By the end of the week, the trading post saw faces that hadn't stepped foot there in months. Ranch hands, silver prospectors, missionaries, officers from the nearby fort, all hungry for spectacle, the way men hunger for card games and gossip. They'd heard stories of weaving so tight it could stop a bullet, of Indian cloth finer than English worsted, of women who weave as if God himself guides their fingers. And with spectacle comes opportunity. Elias could feel the shift. What began as curiosity had become economy. Men who wouldn't have spared a glance at a blanket now asked its price as if inquiring about a thoroughbred stallion. Mallory leaned against a post near the sales table, arms crossed smugly. Told you, spirit whispers make wallets open. Elias ignored the jab. He watched as a merchant from Santa Fe pressed coins into Naazh's hand for a dark red twill blanket, and then immediately declared he could flip it for 10 times as much once he reached the city. Naazh took the coins without complaint, not because she believed the price was fair, but because she knew the price would rise again once it left her sight. Her people had lived in cycles like this before. Later, under the shadow of the canyon, Elias tried once more to negotiate larger shipments. You could bring me 20 of these a month. I could have freight wagons waiting. You have the women, you have the wool. I can guarantee buyers. The East is hungry for things like this. Exotic sells. Naazh regarded him like one might regard a child demanding winter to arrive early. We do not weave for your hunger, she said simply. You weave to trade, Elias pressed. To live, she corrected. He gestured to the blankets drying on the line. Then let them live more. $1,000 per month could change everything for your entire camp. She paused, considering his face, reading him like thread between fingers. You think money is change, she said. We think birth is change. Elias frowned. Birth? Navajo will take her own loom soon. She will weave better than me. That is change. That is growth. Not coin passing between hands of men we will never see twice. Elias opened his mouth, closed it. Cloth still hung between them, like a question neither could answer. But not all who came to trade came with restraint. One afternoon, a lieutenant from the fort, a man named Andrew Cole, hat-tipped with cavalry braid, strode into camp without invitation. He lifted a finished blanket straight from the loom where it had been resting. This one, he declared, tossing a handful of silver coins at Navajo's feet. Naazh's voice cut like flint striking stone. Put it back. Cole glanced down at the silver. Worth twice that on the trail. You're getting a gift. It is not finished, Naazh said, stepping forward. Cole laughed. Looks finished. It has not been blessed. Cole scoffed. Blankets don't need priests. Naazh's gaze hardened. This one does. Cole's jaw set. He tucked the blanket under his arm. Navajo's breath caught. Her hands balled into fists. Edith, who had been nearby carding wool, stood up abruptly. Lieutenant, that is not how trade is done here. Cole turned, surprised to be challenged by a white woman. Miss Green. She stepped closer. Leave it. for a heartbeat, silence. Even the canyon seemed to hold its breath. Cole's hand twitched toward his sidearm, not in threat, just habit. Mallory noticed. He moved between them calmly, voice low. "Don't." Cole hesitated, then exhaled sharply, tossed the blanket back on the loom with theatrical disdain. "Fine, keep your magic quilt." He laughed without another word. The blanket lay crumpled, dust clinging to its edges like insult. Elias bent down, carefully lifting it. He shook the dust away, smoothing it across his lap. He looked to Naazh'. Her face had not softened. He realized then, fully and finally, this was not just trade. This was sovereignty. And every coin offered without respect was an act of conquest.
By late autumn, Elias had reached a breaking point. He had tried everything. He had brought in spinners from Taos, a loomwright from Fort Wingate, even borrowed an instruction pamphlet on European damask production from an officer who'd once toured a textile mill in Manchester. He had watched Edith weave for hours, adjusting tension, counting thread densities, even mimicking the hand motions she'd seen Naazh' use. Every attempt failed. Some patterns looked close, but never alive. They had pattern, but not presence. Even Edith could feel it. One evening, staring at a half-finished replica, she muttered, "It's like trying to sing a song in a language you don't understand. You can match the melody, but the words remain hollow." Elias rubbed his temples, pacing across the trading post floor. He insisted there must be a formula, something measurable, loom angle, warp spacing, wool ply count. "Your problem," Edith interrupted, "is that you're looking for a recipe." "And what should I be looking for?" he demanded. Edith paused. Then she said quietly, "A right." Weeks earlier, he would have scoffed. Now he shut his mouth. He thought of Naazh' pausing before weaving. He had written it off as fatigue. He now realized she had been speaking to the wool, to the loom, to someone he could not see. He remembered how Toyin wouldn't step on a fallen thread, how another woman tied cedar bark on the loom's top beam before starting a piece, how each apprentice whispered something over their spindle before beginning to twist. Elias had assumed superstition. Now he saw structure. His last attempt came with desperation. He bought an unfinished blanket from one of the younger weavers, a practice piece, uneven in its early stage. He brought it to the post, clamped it to one side of a European loom, then tried to continue it using factory wool. The connection rejected him. The new lines twisted wrong. The diamond fractured halfway through its growth. The wool bloomed outward like a wound. No matter how he adjusted, the pattern no longer flowed. He ripped it off the loom in frustration. Edith watched silently from the doorway. She said, "Now you see, you don't continue someone else's weaving. You inherit it." Elias sank into a chair. For the first time in years, he felt small. That winter, the post saw fewer Navajo women arrive, not because they were angry, but because they had measured him and found him not yet worthy. They still traded, food for wool, tools for dye, but their finest pieces no longer came. The diamonds were withheld. The looms had spoken. Mallory leaned beside Elias by the fire one frigid night, coat pulled tight against the biting wind. "So," he said, half joking, half curious, "going to give up? Admit defeat to the spirit whispers?" Elias stared into the flames. "I didn't lose to spirits. I lost to history." Mallory snorted. "Is that a fancy way of saying you lost to a blanket?" Elias shook his head slowly. "No," he murmured. "I lost to a nation." Mallory frowned, not used to hearing that word spoken with reverence instead of warning. Neither said anything more. The fire cracked. Beyond the trading post walls, the canyon loomed, silent, ancient, watching. Spring returned to Canyon de Chelly with the smell of sage and thawed earth. Snow melt trickled down the canyon walls, pooling in shallow streams where women washed wool. Lambs stumbled on shaky legs through sparse grass. The looms, untouched through winter, were raised again with the first warm wind. Elias walked into camp without ledger or coin pouch. No soldiers followed him. No wagons waited outside. He carried only one item, a frame he had carved himself over winter. Crude compared to theirs, but built with patience instead of greed. He set it down near Naazh's loom and waited. Na paused her weaving and glanced over. "You return," she said. "I do," Elias nodded. "You do not bring money." "No." "You do not bring weavers." "No." "Then what do you bring?" He rested one hand on the wooden frame. "I bring respect." Silence. The wind carried the scent of juniper across the clearing. Toyin stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him like a hawk waiting to see if a newcomer would stumble. Na studied the frame, then studied Elias. Finally, she nodded toward an empty space beside her. "Sit." Elias sat cross-legged on the dirt. Toyin placed a spindle in his hand. "Spin," she said. His fingers fumbled. The wool broke. She didn't laugh. She didn't correct him. She simply said, "Again," as he learned tension, learning breath. Edith joined him days later, settling beside Toyin like an old friend. Mallory showed up too, pretending he was only there to check on things, though he spent the morning helping repair a loom brace. The world didn't change overnight, but a different kind of ledger was being written, one not in ink, but in continuity. Years later, Navajo blankets would hang in New York galleries, displayed behind glass with breathless descriptions praising their mathematical sophistication, impossible craftsmanship, pre-industrial genius. Collectors would pay thousands at auction. Scholars would write books attempting to decode the diamond twill. They would ask, how? They would ask, who taught them? They would ask, what loom did they use? And somewhere in Canyon de Chelly, Na, older now, hands still firm, would raise her eyes from her loom and answer a question no one asked aloud. We were not taught. We remembered. For all the traders who once saw the loom as a commodity, for all the soldiers who once saw the blanket as a souvenir, for all the scholars who later saw it as a mathematical mystery, only one truth mattered in the end. The Navajo never wove for approval. They wove for survival. They wove for sovereignty. They wove so their children would inherit not coin, but rhythm. And no empire, not British, not American, not industrial, ever learned to mass-produce memory.